All right, thank you both. I know it's a long day, and you've already done around on the other side of the building there. Um, I'm going to kind of keep the order that I was intending to have in our normal order of business here. And Bill, I'm going to have you go first. I'm actually just going to have both of you do your opening testimonies, and then when we open up the questions, they may direct them to either one of you. So, but Bill, if you'd go ahead and start. Obviously, you know the drill, name and who you represent, and then we'll go to Chair Walker.
All right, my name is Bill Magness. I'm the CEO of ERCOT. I think all of y'all have a deck that we provided with slides, and we gave you a very long deck, but we wanted you to have exactly the same information that we showed our board of directors yesterday. It's the best, most detailed information we have available now on the events on the grid. As I've spoken to several of you about, there are events in the market that followed right on the heels of events in the grid because of the huge invoices, the things that are going out, and we're managing, and with the commission's help, have gotten some flexibility to manage those, and that's going on in real time right now. But really came with a deck to address the issues on the grid last week. And I guess I don't want to walk through a bunch of slides. There's 4 things I'd like you to remember from whatever it is I say today. The first is that, and I know you've heard this before, but it can't be said enough, Texans suffered through this event. It's unacceptable. It involved the electric system, and so it is something our entire industry has got to work to fix, and we want to work with you to do it. This kind of event, we just can't let happen again. And so that's our goal. That's what we want to work toward, and I'm sure you've heard that from others. What I want to provide you is explanation. I don't want to give you excuses. I've tried to focus this on data that we have available, and we'll draw the conclusions we can from that. The second thing is about ERCOT. ERCOT does not own generation. ERCOT does not operate power plants. ERCOT does not own transmission lines like Mr. Mercado and I do. We don't have those assets. We're more like air traffic control for the Texas grid. We are managing the flow of the electricity all day, every day for the ERCOT grid, which is about 90% of the people in Texas and about 75% of the land mass. Obviously there's parts of the state that aren't in ERCOT. What we do is balance the system. The way electricity works, I'm sure you probably heard earlier today, you got to keep it at 60 hertz. If you use more, you got to make more. If you use less, you back it off and you make less. That's the system. And if that system gets out of balance very much, and it can happen quickly, as we'll talk about, that is when you either have to do outages to reduce the demand to meet the supply, or if you don't take actions like that or other actions, you can go into a blackout. And I think you've heard blackout and the black start process described. I think you just heard the 2 of the gentlemen would have to be involved in the black start process, talk to us about how difficult that would be. And one thing I can assure you of is that if we had let this situation slip into a blackout, we would be sitting here today not talking about what happened, but when are we ever going to get the grid back up? We wouldn't have power today, I can almost assure you, because black start will not work that fast. So today, we're here talking about what happened, and there's a lot to fix, but we're using electricity in about the same way we did on February 10th, before all this happened. The system is up, the system is intact, and we're able to use the system and get power from it as we did before. And that's only because it was kept in control. That wasn't an easy job, as you heard from those folks just before me. Number 3 is the storm took out at its peak 48.6% of the generation fleet in ERCOT. And we'll talk in more detail about what that means, but you're basically trying to operate and serve 100% of your demand, of your load, with just about half of your generation. And again, there's lots of reasons why that happened. I'll show you how it happened and when it happened. And I think there'll be a lot of discussions in the future about how it happened and what the issues were. It crossed lines. It was nuclear, it was coal, it was gas, it was wind. Everything was affected, and it was affected by the storm. But that made it almost impossible to run in a normal condition. It did make it impossible to run in a normal condition and try to serve demand that was skyrocketing at the same time that supply was going down the hill. And that created that imbalance that takes you out of 60 hertz real fast. And that's why we had to act. And the fourth thing is just, I can tell you, if we had not acted, we would be working on black start right now. That would be the job, because we were not able to maintain control of the system. We'd have damaged lines, we'd have substations and generators damaged for probably long periods of time. And I really want to get straight to sort of the event where we did shed the load, and then I'll tell you why it took so long to get it back. And I think you've heard probably a lot today about that. But if I could take you to the deck, we've got if you look at slide 11, this is a timeline that starts on Sunday, the 14th, and goes through the hour when we declared the EEA3, the Energy Emergency Alert, where we shed load and started to reduce the demand, or where we directed that for the transmission owners to conduct. So starting that morning, we were already calling for conservation. The forecasts we had and that we tried to share with folks were that Sunday night we would probably use more electricity in Texas than we ever had before. Monday morning, we were expecting we may well see rotating outages. Tuesday morning, over the morning peak, we could still see rotating outages, but we were anticipating sort of more normal, shorter rotating outages like we've seen historically, like we saw in 2011. And then we thought maybe we could ride through the rest, even though the demand was going to be high, with the supply that we had committed to serve at that time. So I kind of fast forward you, there's a lot of work, a lot of communications with State Operations Center. I think there was a press availability. There's various things going on like that. But on the grid, at 7:06 p.m., we hit a new winter all-time peak. We served more load on the system than we ever had. That number is 69,222 megawatts, and it busted the old record set 2 years ago by over 3,200 megawatts. We were approaching numbers that we served during summer peaks, which the highest of that is 74,000. And actually, our data shows that if we had not shed load, we probably would have exceeded a summer peak in Texas on a winter night, which is just beyond anything we've ever seen. So we're going through and we're feeling a little good. We know Monday is going to be an extraordinarily difficult day. We may have rotating outages in the morning. We know Tuesday's not going to be much easier, but we're feeling like we got over the highest winter peak ever. The system was able to support that. That was 7 o'clock. And around 11 o'clock, that's when things started to happen that went downhill. We just saw an enormous amount in rapid succession of generation come offline. And when that generation began to come offline at that speed, that's when we have to move into an energy emergency alert. We moved into an energy emergency alert 1, and very quickly we were into level 2 and into level 3 at 1:20 a.m., where we called the load shed. And let me take you, if you go to the next slide, this one really details, I know a lot, y'all been talking a lot about, what we did, what our operators did that early AM on Monday, the 15th. So if you look over on the left, there we go into EEA, we shed 1,000 megawatts of load, and again, you shed the megawatts of load to try to match to the supply side. You're not trying to overshoot it. If you shed too much too fast, you're going to overshoot the frequency and have another kind of problem. So we're trying to match it effectively, and we did for a while. If you looked at the bottom of this chart, you see it's a very short period of time here. 1:23 a.m. We end a little after 2 a.m. So 1:23, we're in EEA already, and we've already got 35,000 megawatts of generation out. And then we're going along, and then we start seeing additional outages. You just see these marked here with those green dots. 1,400 megawatts, 248, another 329. We then ordered another round of load shed to try to keep up with that, and it just kept coming. And I was in the control room that night, and what you saw was every time the screen would update, there would be new generation off, and you'd shed load and think you'd manage that, and then there'd be more off. And so there was a constant, reaction game being played, but we saw this frequency continue to decline. We ordered 3,000 more of load shed. And when you get down to that red zone, that's 59.4 frequency. That is very low. We can only stay in 59.4 frequency for 9 minutes before a bunch of generators start automatically tripping off. Under frequency relays start kicking in. You heard the transmission owners talking about that. That's a disaster. That's the first stage of, really going down. That's your safety net. And we were pushing past the safety net. We got down to 59.302. We had to order more load shed. We ordered another 3,500 megawatts, and that recovered our frequency. And as we came out, we continued to see generation come off. And I know I understand the testimony this morning from generators talked about things that, ERCOT did that could have made generation come off. And I think it's likely, we did see one. When we were talking about the issue in the Senate this morning, my understanding was that they were saying that they had come off on under frequency load shed. And it turned out that wasn't what they were saying, but nobody had ever showed me what they were going to say. So I think we kind of figured out that what was happening there is, as we were coming back up to level frequency, for example, a coal plant might be running hard because the signal of low frequency, even at 59.9, tells that coal plant, pour it on, man. That, we know we're needed if we're at this lower frequency, so keep going. And then when we got to enough load shed that we could start the ramp up, again, it was like Kenny and Alan were talking about some of their equipment. Turning these big ships, sometimes it's troublesome. And as the one we're aware of, we did see it's likely one of those in the green dots on the upslope. It was able to come back. Came back, I guess, by 5 o'clock that day. So we got it back on the system. But I think that's the kind of, as I understand it, what they were talking about. But I think that's the kind of thing that if you have to move fast, like we had to move fast, that can occur. I mean, we're not saying it can't, but I think that could happen in any event where you're having to, come up a slope. So as we go on out the end of this, you can see we got back to 60 hertz, and we stayed at 60 hertz. We didn't have any more frequency excursions, we call them, where we went down low, even though we still had a lot of generation come off. But you're just seeing what ended up being almost half of the generation fleet fly off as the storm bangs on us and, flies in. And again, we've heard it's about gas supply. We've heard it's about mechanical and instrumentation issues. There are wind turbines that are frozen. Later, not this night, but we had one of the nuclear units trip off for a cold-related reason. It was across the board. So again, I want to explain. I'm not interested in blame on that part, because we'll find out more about exactly what happened. And once we know all the causes, y'all and everybody else can be thinking about how to keep it from going that way again on the generation side. But so we got it to 60 hertz. Now it's, early Monday morning. We got to keep it there. That's the only way we're going to be able to get the system back to normal and the load shed ended. And so we think, okay, generation's going to keep coming. Going to keep coming back. That's usually what happens. It'll trip off, but a lot of it can come back. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that didn't happen. This spike in generation outages we saw late night, early morning, it went up and it stayed high. And every minute of every day, generators were working with our operators to try to get that generation back on. It was no lack of will. And so whatever the reasons were that they went off, they had very difficult times coming back up. And if it's gas supply, you can't run without fuel. Pretty straightforward. If it's instrumentation issues, sending crews out to work on icy roads on problems that are happening when it's 0 degrees, I sympathize. I don't have to do that kind of work. And that's hard work and difficult to do in those weather conditions. So for whatever reason, we found we were having a really hard time getting it on. And as I keep referring to the panel I just heard, but they give a lot of really good information about these issues. It's like Kenny and Alan were saying, we would call them and say, take some more off, put some on, take some more off. And we didn't want to be doing that with as much frequency, but we got up to 20,000 megawatts of load shed on the system in order to maintain the 60 hertz balance. And I agree with those gentlemen. That is a lot. That is more than we've ever seen. That is many times more than we've ever seen or required. And one of the things that made this part so hard is when people were asking me, as they were asking you, why'd this take so long? When's it going to come back? What time can I count on getting my power back? What day can I count on getting my power back? It was all dependent on this process of getting generation back on the system to where it could match demand that was still very high because of the winter weather. So as you can see, we go through the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, we begin to see that improvement that I'm sure you've heard about earlier today. We start to see the generation really come back. We're able, I think, by the late night Wednesday going into Thursday, if I'm remembering right, we were able to take it down to 0 requests for load shed from us. Now, that didn't mean everybody was back up, because the transmission owners had to do the associated work, some of which was out in the field, some of which was manual, so it took time to do that. And on Thursday, we felt like we were still very much at risk because the load was real high. Our morning forecast looked like it'd be tough to meet. But we managed to, ramp things into a safe place, and by Friday morning, we're all out of the emergency. And so that long period of constant work to try to get everything back is really the reason why this took so long and did so much damage, because it was that long period where people suffered so much. When you couldn't rotate the outages, and you've heard why. The amounts required were so big, and and it was difficult all around, because as we made progress with the generation coming back, we just like they just said, we would say, okay, recall 1,000 megawatts, and you could say we were bouncing them around, but we were also trying to get every megawatt back in service that we could, even if just for a while, because we had not been able to rotate. So within the limits of safety and good practice, we all pushed each other because we didn't want to leave anybody off longer than they had to be, particularly since those outages couldn't rotate. And so we ended up, having an enormous amount of load shed hang on for that long time. Now, I think I only want to show you one more slide, and then I'll stop talking. Slide 19, just to kind of give you the magnitude of what this looked like on the system. We talked a whole lot about 2011 and the rotating outages we saw in 2011 with that weather event. What we show you on slide 19 is a comparison of some facts about 2011 and 2021. And if you start at the top, in 2011, when we had load shed on February 2nd, the maximum generation we had out on the system during that time period was a little over 14,702 to be exact. The maximum amount we had out last week, 52,277 megawatts of generation. We had a lot more generation forced out right before we went into EA. In 2011, it was 1,100 megawatts. In 21, it was 2,400 and almost 2,500 megawatts. Why does that matter? Did we call it too soon? Did we call it too late? It was moving extraordinarily fast, and at very large chunks of generation were coming off. And so as we tried to catch up with it, it just kept getting worse, and we kept catching up with it. So we didn't wait to call rotating outages. But the way that system was moving, it just kept bringing us down until we got to the point of load shed where we got out of the danger zone. And then just all these statistics are just dramatically worse in every way for serving the grid. The final one at the bottom there, in 2011, the estimated peak load, and you have to estimate this because you don't know what the peak's going to be since you took some of it off, but we can do a backcast. We've got a slide on that in here for this event, but you do a backcast. The estimated peak load was 59,000 that day in 2011. The estimated peak load, if we had not shed load last week, would have been 76,819 megawatts. The hottest day, the biggest usage day in the summer in Texas we've ever seen was 74,820. This was extraordinary. And unfortunately, it had an extraordinary impact on our generators and on our ability to keep up, and in turn, had a horrible impact on Texans. And we don't want to see that again. And one thing, and I know you've talked to other witnesses about it, but I just really urge us to look at, and the industry needs to look at this. The technology solutions, I don't know if they're policy solutions, but this not being able to rotate outages in an extreme event, we've got to figure something out. And we messaged about rotating outages for years, and we always had a hard time getting people to understand what the rotating outage was and that it wasn't a total blackout and all that. And we felt like going into that Monday, maybe we'd done it. We were seeing media reports that understood the concept, that, you know, we're telling people what it would be like in the morning. And so we finally got the rotating outages message down, and this was the first time of any system I know of that you had so much on outage for that long that you couldn't rotate. So then people are confused about that. And we could have done much better getting on top of it as we were figuring out what we were seeing and getting our media availabilities and our calls with y'all and others done faster and earlier. And, you know, we know we have to be ready for that in the future. But it was an extraordinary event on every single level in that way. But we got to figure out a way to not put people through that part again in whatever way we can. And I know there's a lot of other policy issues y'all want to talk about, you know, things we can do to do better, to not see this again. And I just want to let you know I'm committed, ERCOT's committed to working with y'all in whatever way you need us to look at those issues, gather data, whatever you need, because this is critically important. So there, I'll stop. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm guessing there's going to be some questions for you.